As I have been saying, inflation is not dead and has proved to be sticky at current levels, which are too high. The CPI report released earlier today was worse than just being sticky and showed an increase in CPI and core CPI. The month-to-month increase in CPI consumer price inflation was 0.5%, with the consensus at 0.3%. Importantly, this is the third straight month of month-to-month increases, with the September to October increase in CPI at 0.2%, then 0.3% in October to November, then 0.4% November to December, and lastly 0.5% December to January. On a non-seasonally adjusted basis, CPI rose 3% for the 12 months ending in January 2025, with core CPI rising 3.3%. The month-to-month rise in core CPI was 0.4%, compared to 0.2% from November to December. For the 12 months ending in January 2025, both core CPI and CPI rose 0.1% compared to the 12-month period ending in December 2024. Stock investors have a slightly negative and muted response to this report, with the S&P 500 currently down about 0.5% as of 10 a.m. Central Standard Time on February 12, 2025. But that kind of decline can happen on a no-news day due just to internal stock market dynamics unrelated to anything happening in the real world. Bond investors have a slightly more negative reaction and have taken the 10-year Treasury yield up about 13 basis points, but that is still close to what I would call a normal spread to the average annual inflation rate priced into the 10-year Treasury inflation protected securities, or what is called the break-even inflation rate. I know that Trump has stated, and tens of millions of people believe what he says, and I'm not one of them, that tariffs are paid by foreign countries. The U.S. Customs Service collects the U.S. tariffs from the U.S. importer. Just one of the facts that's easily discoverable by a 1-minute effort on the internet. And Trump's policies, including new tariffs and deportation of illegal migrants, will add to inflationary pressures if they do continue to go forward with those policies. What will happen to the price of a new car purchased by a U.S. consumer when Trump's 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum imports goes into effect? Any U.S. company that uses a lot of steel and aluminum in the process of manufacturing will have to increase their prices in order to recoup that cost. And domestic producers of aluminum and steel will raise their prices as well, given the higher prices that the imports are costing the domestic manufacturers, and they see a profit opportunity in just raising their prices. Of course, they're going to raise their prices. The cost will go up a lot for new vehicles. That's just common sense and what actually will happen in the real world as opposed to the pretend world that we now live in. If 25% tariffs are levied on parts and manufactured in Canada and Mexico, and vehicles manufactured in Mexico and sold in the U.S., then the cost of a new car will jump somewhere in the $5,000 to $7,000 range. That's not my estimate. That's the estimate of people that know how to make those estimates. Unfortunately, the price increases are paid by U.S. consumers, including those who did not vote for tariff increases last November. Trump needs, in my opinion, to abandon all proposals to increase tariffs now, since he is risking reigniting inflation. And if that occurs, and the risk is certainly there, more likely than not, if he continues implementing tariffs and deporting millions of immigrants who work in the U.S. supply chain, the Fed will have to respond by raising interest rates, possibly causing a recession to bring inflation down. And what happens when Trump responds to the Fed increasing inflation in this kind of scenario? Replacing Fed members with his own sycophants who lower interest rates as inflation surges in response. Since that is the worst possible response to rising inflation, as we've just experienced, and it was obvious when it was happening in 2021 and 2022 when the Fed kept ZIRP and QE as inflation surged, with CPI hitting an annual rate of 8.5% in June before they abandoned those stimulative monetary policies. And even then, they only raised the federal funds rate from 0 to 0.25% by a quarter point to 0.25 to 0.5, and that, of course, had no impact on inflation whatsoever. And another reason for inflation was excessive money creation by the Fed during that period. So, since I have no debt and my portfolio is heavily weighted in short-term corporate bonds, treasury bills, and treasury money market funds, I want short-term rates to go higher. It will benefit me. I'm still driving a 1987 Mercedes that's in prime condition and a 2007 Saturn R, so I'm not buying a new car, and I have everything I have is paid for, so I'm really not affected that much by inflation. I actually benefit from inflation because I'm going to earn more in interest, and my portfolio is geared to generating interest income. The inflation report today should keep the Fed on hold for at least the remainder of this year. Lowering rates now would be far too risky, and inflation is far more harmful to the U.S. economy than increasing the unemployment rate from 4 to 5%. If you get 4 to 5% inflation embedded in the U.S. economy, that's going to cause a whole lot more damage long term. So any decrease in the federal funds rate now would do more harm than good, but that doesn't mean that they won't do it, as we've seen them act and maintain incredibly inappropriate monetary measures in 2021 and 2022 when inflation was surging. And then there's the wild card of Trump replacing the Fed members if they feel that they have to raise interest rate to combat surging inflation, and that would only make matters even worse.